going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you on a wonderfully overcast day in the middle of summer here in Tbilisi, Georgia. And the reason that's so wonderful, and we have actually had a lot of rain, is because elsewhere in Europe, it's been reaching like 40 degrees, 46 in Spain. And for those of you who are American, as am I, that doesn't have any particular resonance. 40 degrees sounds just like a bit chilly. But in Celsius, that is broiling. 40 is like 104, and I think 46 is something like 116 or something. Don't quote me on that. I'm just going off the top of my head. So, while southern France and Italy and Spain have been broiling, we've had this spate of cooler weather. And it looks to get warmer by the end of the week, but for now, I rejoice. Sad Georgians don't, because they like the sun and don't seem to appreciate the clouds the way I do. All that time in Alaska. Well, I decided to wander into some topic. I have no idea what I'm going to say yet. The reason I am doing this is because I do have lots that I am saying, and I'm trying to get more videos edited, but the problem is it takes so long for me, and I'm dealing with 5 channels, only 3 of which are somewhat active, as is the Anadromist and the Anadrome, where I do my film and media commentary, and Georgian Crossroads less, and Gravity from Above. I can just put stuff on there, but I am getting stuff ready for that, including my years ago interviews with the Quay brothers and Jan Schwankmeyer. And if those names don't mean anything to you, well, they will. So, what can I say? Before we go too far, I just want to let you know another thing I've been doing is uploading tons of content over on my new Patreon page, which is linked down below. And now some people have been joining up as free members. I'm going to knock that off because I want you to join up at the $2 membership cost. You can go and look for free, but you can't. I realize I've made some sort of mistake, and if you've already done that, don't do that. It's just it's not part of the game. But I have to figure out, I'm new to this, so if you get some sort of notice saying your free membership, which does nothing except what a public viewing will give you anyway. So I don't know why that's happening. But there are a couple different membership levels. One at $2 a month, certainly you can afford that. And I am going to do something very soon. I am going to, and maybe I think Sunday this week, I am going to have a marathon is the wrong word, but late Sunday evening for me, say starting at 10 o'clock my time, which is 10 a.m. in California, which I realize a lot of people will be in church at that moment if you're in California, but if you're closer to me, you won't be. I don't know how many people will be at church, but a few. But the point is this. I need to get people aware of my Patreon page and to have them, do you hear yourself, signing up? Because this whole thing that's been going on for so long here of me making absolutely no money from YouTube doing this, and it needs to end. Because frankly, it is exhausting me, and it is exhausting my time, and I'm not getting things done that I need to. And we'll just leave it there. Just look out. Somewhere around this will be the message about this kind of group meeting. I'll go live stream I guess it's going to be tomorrow night, because I'm probably going to put this out Saturday, or it could be Friday. I haven't decided yet. But look for the announcement, which will be a separate short video about this. So, without any further ado, let me wander into trouble and talk about evolution and my problems with evolution. And I'm not going to look at this too much from a scientific point of view, nor a religious point of view. I'm looking at this from a sociological point of view and from a somewhat philosophical point of view. What do I mean? Well, first of all, I have lots of friends. I am a Christian. I have lots of friends who are Christians. I have some who are hardcore 7-day creationists, hardcore 24-hour-day creationists. And that's a bit extreme for me. I get it. I get why they believe that. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it's highly unlikely that that's how God worked. Because then you have to explain why everything seems much older than that. And you end up coming up with these stories about bones being put in the earth for, the devil to tempt us and all of this, all of which seems to me a bit on the occult side and not something that I think God did to, or the devil did to deceive us, and that God, fought against us. It all gets quite hairy. But if you believe that, I'm certainly not going to have a big argument with you, because God could have done that. And then there are the people who say one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day, as it says in one of the epistles of Peter. And then these people tend to get just as dogmatic and say it's 7,000 years, which to me is not the whole point of the first few chapters of Genesis. I think I do believe in some kind of evolution. You can call it a theistic evolution if you want. I don't put a name on it. I just know that the world that we have is not some sort of... The actual physical properties... I'm knocking on a door here that you can't see. The actual physical properties of the earth are not meant to deceive us. We are not Gnostics who believe that physical matter is evil, that the devil did not create the world, no matter what you believe. So I'm just going to say that for now. I'm not going to try to prove anything. If you have really strong thoughts about that, I don't mind if you leave a comment on it, but that's not where I'm going with this. Follow me if you can. On the other hand, we live in a time where a materialistic explanation of the universe has essentially run roughshod over most people's view of the world. Even among people who are postmodernists, who supposedly have a different point of view, the materialist modernist explanation is that essentially there are particles and waves. At some point, they blew up, and call it the Big Bang. And then eventually all of this came into being. Not my library, I built that. But all the things we see around us, and especially humanity as is now configured. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue all of that. All I will say, and I've discussed this in my video about why I believe in God, is that, to me, that is ridiculously simplistic and reductionist. Absolutely ridiculous. Because it doesn't take into account that the further down you go into the subatomic world, what you don't find is simply atoms. Subatomic particles, quarks and gluons and all the rest of it, the further down you go. What you find is they're all being held in relationships to each other. Each atom different from the other. Each quark, gluon, electron, proton, different from the other. Each doing some sort of dance around each other. So what we find is that they're already in some sort of relation before you can talk about the particles or waves. In other words, there's something in there. I've heard really materialistic people laugh at the notion of any sort of design, to which I'm sitting there going like, what are you, a pinhead? I mean, that nothing is a design? I mean, even AI knows it was designed. you know. So what I see down there is, I guess it's from information theory, where it says the smallest piece of information comes before it, the smallest particles of matter and energy. In other words, the information is there prior to the thing. It's the same with us. One cell is what we are when we are first created in our mother's wombs. That's the beginning. And yet all the information is already there. So it's clear that the information, or the relationship, or as the Bible says, the Word, God spoke the Word into existence, precedes everything. And to say otherwise is to essentially deny the evidence. You can say, well, yeah, and you can go all of that, and I'm not going to go into all of that, except to say that from the very beginning, I mean, I've heard so many people in my lifetime joke about, like, yeah, well, we're all just like atoms, you know, we could just fall apart. No, you can't, because you're not a collection of atoms, you are a collection of relationships. And these are really hard, fast relationships, much, much better relationships than most humans have with each other. So that's all I'm going to say about that stuff for now. That's just a little of my background. I think God did create the world, and that the information is there from the beginning, the speaking of God. Now, in this secular version of the world where suddenly all of this stuff came to be, somehow all of the instructions were there from the beginning, there's almost a deterministic sense of how we got here. I find that one of the variations on this is that we've now arrived at the postmodern era, where, for instance, all human relationships are socially constructed. And what's interesting to me about that is, therefore, you come up with the tabula rasa idea of humanity. And so whatever I feel, feelings get really important here, is what I could be, should be, which is also nonsense. I mean, there is a point at which, yes, you want to do what is most suited to your personality. But to take it into the realm of identity and to say, I am myself and I think I'm, and then fill in the blank X, and who are you to tell me otherwise, gets into another stew of irrationality. And it's also based upon the idea that everything is essentially dead, that it's all just dead particles, that you can swap. I mean, this is what guides our human relationships, our love relationships. People think they can just separate, come together and separate, and come together and separate, and it doesn't matter how many times, and eventually you're going to learn something, which is all just bullshit. First couple of times it happens, your whole soul is divided, and now how can you learn to trust? And trust, those relationships in time, that's at the core of everything. So, this is the kind of idea behind what we call the woke ideas, or the Marxist ideas, or the neo-Darwinistic ideas, and all the rest of it, that it's all kind of like, it's all like Play-Doh, it's all clay, it's all plasticine, and that we just mold it any way we want because there's no rule book. And yet I would say there is indeed a rule book, and it starts at the very bottom with relationships. And here's what we've learned. If you pull those relationships apart at a subatomic level, what do you get? Explosions. Weird. So from the very beginning, relationships are not supposed to be damaged without causing some serious effect. And that goes all the way up to how we treat the world around us, how we treat the animals in our lives, how we treat each other. So slight remark. You know, I've heard people say, well, you know, sex is just like saying hello. And there's so many different ways to do it. And who's to say? And sometimes, well, you know what? You can offend someone by the way you say hello and cause a permanent rift in your relationship, let alone your sexual ethics. So you can't go very far in that direction without running into some serious problems. There are rules. Now, what are those rules? That's what people debate all the time. That's been the history of philosophy and theology and ethics and what is morality and all these. But I would say that the morality is there all along, and it's to live in time and not to violate relationships. I think all the 10 Commandments can be summed up in one phrase. It's all relationships. Don't fuck them over. So, but here's the thing. So on the woke side, you've had this social construction, conceptual view of humanity. And that's created all these really weird ideas. For instance, the idea of equality and equity that show up in these relationships there's no personhood connected to them. We're just supposed to do what we can to equal things out. But that goes back to this materialistic view of nature. If everything is just stuff, then it should all be equal. Where does the should come from in that sentence? I have no idea, because it's nothing generated within nature, in that view of nature. So, now I want to speak about my troubles with evolution as an idea. And I believe, as I said from the beginning, there's some kind of evolution. Clearly, I mean, things do change. If evolution is just taken as meaning change, things definitely over time change. But if by evolution you mean progress, no. It certainly doesn't, because there's no progress. And then there's certainly no progress in what it means to be human. People will often say, well, we know more now. In modern times, we've had to change these stories because of modern... And I'm sitting there going like, no, I'm sorry. You're never going to prove to me that we've evolved over the writers of the Bible or Shakespeare or Plato or Dostoevsky or anyone in the past. That you're never going to tell me we know more than them. We have arrived at a better place. If anything, I can prove the opposite. It's just like we are now these weird creatures addicted to dopamine hits and likes on our machines. That's not progress. That is devolution. We are now, people are now having AI relationships. There's talk now of people seeing AI like a godlike deity. That's not evolution in the progressive sense. But indeed, things are changing. So, when things started getting crazy in the second half of the teens, I don't know why they call them the tens, the teens. It's the word we've always used. You know why? Spoiler alert, teen means 10. Yeah, but what about 11 and 12? Oh, just stop. Stop being pedantic. But anyway, in the second half of the teens, something started happening where people started applying these social constructivist conceptual ideas about humanity, like willy-nilly, at random, to as much as they could, especially revolving around the self, which of course is a really great way of saying essentially, I want to do what I want to do, and you can't tell me otherwise because I'm evolving. To which the answer is, do you have a mirror? Because if we have a mirror, we can show you that you're not. You're still the same as the rest of us. Except, of course, for the times we live in, which are confusing times. Well, as a reaction to this, you started to find people coming on the scene who are coming from different camps. Now, there were people who were Christians who were questioning this. There were people who were libertarians who were questioning this. There were people who were now called themselves Stoics, although a lot of evidence is that these people aren't Stoics in the same way that the Greeks were. And there were people coming out of psychology, particularly evolutionary psychology, like Jordan Peterson. Now, I think there's a lot to be learned from evolutionary psychology. There's a fly buzzing around me, so if I reach for it at some point, excuse me. It's following my breath. And somehow I got it in the room the other day when I had to open the window for something, and it just won't die. They're supposed to die. They don't live that long because of evolution. One of the great evolution jokes is Emo Phillips, a comedian I really like. He once said, "You know, I don't swim as well as I used to, thanks to evolution." Which is brilliant. But here's the thing. So Jordan Peterson and many of the people he interviewed came on the scene. And they started connecting our humanity to, in a sense, what we've learned about evolutionary psychology. Now, I've been hearing variations on this for quite a while. I remember in the 1990s showing up at L'Abri, a Christian institution, and I went through some material about what was going on in the counterculture. And Henry Rollins did this one piece called The Mechanic, about how everything was just a mechanical process, and it's all about essentially the male being the hunter, going after the woman, and the woman throwing all these excuses up at him. And I said that to some students, and they said, "Well, that's right." To which I looked at them and said, "You got a problem, boys." Well, that problem has now spread throughout quite a bit of our society. And that problem is you learn a little bit, a dangerously little bit, about monkeys or dogs or something and how they evolve, how they deal with each other. And, we have the concept of the alpha dog, the alpha wolf. We have, which scientists kind of look at that as being sort of it's not really the way you're thinking it is. There's not just a dog at the top, because the others will rip it to pieces if it does the wrong thing. There's studies on chimpanzees. Peterson loves to talk about how chimpanzees will rip each other to shreds. And it's easy to look at chimpanzees as being simians like ourselves and saying, well, we rip ourselves to shreds. Wow, look at the relationships between us and chimpanzees. And granted, there is something in that. However, the one thing that is not stated clearly enough is that given all that we know about animals, there is a radical difference between human beings and the animal world. We are not simply the last member of the primate family. That's not what we are. We are something else. We are something with an additive ingredient that no other animal has. For instance, look at the books behind me. What is that about? Do you think that has anything to do with being an animal? I think not. When we look back, the signs of human consciousness go back in the archaeological record, go back at least 100,000 years, although there's evidence going back around 300,000. But the point is this. There came something that happened to these quote-unquote apes, and they started doing things like burying the dead. They started painting on walls. They started making images. They started cutting into bones. They started making shadows on the walls in caves. They started making figures and playing with them. They started looking at animals in a very distinctive way. And none of this corresponds to anything in the animal world. In other words, as some people have said, well, it was nature becoming aware of itself. And the problem with that from a purely materialistic point of view is there's nothing in that view of nature to support the idea of a thing suddenly becoming aware of itself if, and it's the big if it's all just natural products in a essentially soulless universe, essentially empty universe of stuff drifting around and colliding with each other. There's nothing there. I mean, you have to say it's a big fluke that we're here, that we're conscious and all of that. And yet, that's not what we find. From the beginning of what seems to be a modern human being of some sort, whether it was Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal or whatever, you find these things that there is a moral consciousness. Not only that, you find the violation of that moral consciousness, because not only are we higher than animals, and indeed we are hierarchically. I don't really care if someone says, oh, you're just saying that we're not any better than animals. Well, we certainly are worse than them. Most people who say we're not any better than animals will admit we're worse than them. We have devised tortures and evils and that no animal has ever possibly conceived. So I would say we're both above them and below them, and we tend to get below them the more we give into the animal side of our personality. So what do I mean? I mean that these guys I was talking to back at L'Abri in 1993, they were basically both saying, I can't stop myself from lusting after women because that is natural. So one might as well be natural. Which strikes me, having grown up before that time, as being an excuse. And it's a license to be bad, essentially. To give in to that animal side, to use the ideas of evolution, to essentially say, we're just animals, baby. As some of our songs tell us, we're all just mammals. We're all like the monkeys. We're like dogs. And in fact, what's strange about that is, if you call a woman a female dog, and we use the word bitch, that is a severe insult. It's not an insult if you go, oh, she's being bitchy. But if you call her a bitch, you're saying she's a female dog. And what's the difference between a female dog and a human dog? A female dog goes from body to body to body. And a male dog does the same thing. And many people have used, and I'm looking at you, Andrew Tate, many people have used the idea of evolution to excuse the darkest part of our humanity. And here's the thing that rarely gets mentioned. Even Jordan Peterson rarely mentions this. And that is this. Here's one of the main traits of being a human being. I can actually choose to not follow the dictates of my biology. I can choose not to simply be promiscuous. I can choose to not do, for instance, someone does something that makes me very angry. I can choose not to slug them in the face. Or I can choose to be much worse than that. I can choose to do what Jesus said, turn the other cheek. As William Burroughs said, Jesus' notion of morality, he called it biologic suicide. To which I said, well, that explains a lot about you, Mr. Burroughs. For you it is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Whereas Jesus was proposing something higher. And here's what we see when someone points these things out, is they say, well, you're just being a hypocrite. You know all those Catholic priests, the ones who did bad things to their younger parishioners? Well, they were just following the dictates of their conscience. They were just being, essentially following their animal evolutionary nature. Except the problem was they were all constrained by the Catholic Church and they were repressed, and the repression came out like that. Now, there's a bit of truth to that. But what's often left out in a discussion like that is the fact that the majority of the cases we're looking at happened after the sexual revolution of the 60s, after people like Hugh Hefner and the Kinsey report came out, after people said essentially, you can do whatever you want. Now, women, you have the pill. You can control the birth rate. And if that's not a problem, you can go in and have the result of that liaison eliminated. And wait, we've got a pill now. Now, it's just a little bit of protoplasm in there. You can get rid of that. So this idea of there being, that the universe is somehow Well, as Hans Rookmarker says, when you behead the universe doesn't die immediately, but eventually everything we know loses meaning. And that's what's happened from the purely materialistic perspective. Now, what I'm saying is this. As a human being, I know with my own life, I can resist all sorts of temptations. I heard someone say once that we need to allow our younger people to see the images of various sorts of gender and sexual identity so that they have more choices. And I thought to myself, that's a really interesting term for the older term, temptation. And again, one side sees, well, we're all just socially constructed. Let's reconstruct things after our image, because it doesn't actually matter, except, of course, if you were to suggest to someone they shouldn't, because now you're interfering with the only religion they have left after all the rest have been destroyed, which is the self, the religion of the self, my desires. That's the only religion that matters to most people. It's not being nice to everyone else. It's not forgiving. It's not love. It is, in fact, to simply say, I am me. To thine own self be true, as Polonius said in Hamlet, except they don't realize that Polonius was a snake. When he said that, he's one of the most devious characters in Hamlet. And he's saying, to thine own self be true. And then other people will quote that like it's a great saying. But Shakespeare knew better, which is why we have not evolved beyond Shakespeare. Anyone says, these people from the past didn't know what they were doing. Oh, yeah, they did. They just didn't choose to do the stupid things we do. And they had their own crimes. During the Tudor era, people tended to get killed a lot more often. Whereas in our era, people tend to be isolated and abandoned on their screens and given AI as an algorithmic deity, the blind idiot gods of H.P. Lovecraft. So, here's what I say. Resist the temptation to describe your activity as the result of evolution, of particularly blind evolution. Try to understand why beauty and meaning matter. Try to understand why we read and collect things on books. Try to understand why we go to movies and watch all sorts of things happen to ourselves. Try to understand that we can also prove our humanity by descending below the status of animals. In many ways, one of the reasons I think people get very romantic about animals is because animals don't choose to do the things we choose to do to them. We bred dogs into all sorts of strange creatures. They wouldn't have done that. We have turned cats into these cute little creatures, where if you actually look at cats outside your door when they're not looking at you, they aren't cute. I'll give you a hint. They are dark. The male cat will eat the young, cute, big-eyed little creatures that make you feel gooey. We need to understand that in our world, we are called to understand our world. As it says in the beginning of Genesis, we're called to name things. That's essentially a scientific act. And if our science has led us to see evolutionary forms, which I think are in some manner directed, some manner I can't prove, I can't show you, but it's clear. It's like, I'm not sitting here talking into the void through electronics and digital matter just because this is just me trying to reproduce. It's not, many people who believe in the materialistic view of evolution say, well, the rock bottom thing is to survive and genetic survival, to keep your genes going. I'm going like, have you ever looked at humanity? They don't seem very interested in keeping their genes going. When they have too many of themselves, they kill each other. They do things like smoke and take drugs. They ruin their relationships. They come up with excuses for why they shouldn't get married or have children because they want to be themselves. And they have no basis for a statement like that. So I'm saying this. if you want to find meaning, now there's all sorts of ways to do this, but one way is to reject the notion that you are merely, and notice the word merely, a product of evolution. You are not merely a product of evolution. What monkeys and dolphins and even lobsters, Mr. Peterson, what all these things do is of very little consequence to us, except in our relationship to them. And sometimes, given the way we've screwed up the world, we have to take care of them because otherwise they will just simply go extinct. So, learn to see beyond this evolutionary dilemma. Don't follow the people. If you're a man and you listen to too much in the manosphere, what a clunky name that is. You know, if you get too far into the Andrew Tate side of things and you somehow stumbled into my video, don't believe it. Don't believe that all the women want is hypergamy to marry up. It's like saying all the men want is to spread their seed further and further. Because that's not what we want. Nobody really wants that. What it is that's what we've been given as ideas. And people choose to do what they're allowed to do. They will get away with murder if you let them. You know, it's like in the movies The Purge, everyone gets a day to do whatever they want, all the crazy stuff they want. Well, there are people who will do that, but that's the reason there is indeed a point to society and civilization, as faulty as they are. You know, are churches perfect? No. But they also help to restrain our baser desires. And like I said, we shouldn't see ourselves simply as evolved animals. And we need to see ourselves as something better, because if we don't, we will become something worse than our beloved animals. Okay, I'm done. Check out my Patreon page, link down below. Look for the little announcement of when that live stream is coming. And, we will meet each other again. This is Bern in Georgia, the country, not the state, saying, Droabit nachwamdis. We will indeed meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
I'm no kin to the monkey, no, no, no. The monkey's no kin to me, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know much about his ancestors, but mine didn't swing from a tree. It seems so unbelievable, and yet they're saying it's true. They're teaching us about it in school now, that humans were monkeys once too. Whoa, I'm no kin